Well, it's November 30th, 2016, and we are back for another edition of the MMA Ratings Hangout. I am Raphael Garcia, as usual, here to talk to you all things mixed martial arts, and my co-host Schwan Humes is not sure if he's on his way. Haven't talked to him today, but as always, he will hop in if necessary. But we have quite a bit to talk about today because it was a very big day. It was a very interesting week. We started out earlier this week where Bjorn Rebney rose from the ashes per se, um, and announced that he has a big announcement in reference to the MMA community, and it would reshape the MMA world. Well, before he had the chance to announce that news today, which we will gladly get to, there was a story on Deadspin about the leaking of the URLs for mixed martial arts athletes, uh, Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association, otherwise known as the MMAAA. Well, people knew what was coming, and today we got the announcement of a fighters association. This is the second effort in this is a second effort in this year, or we've seen in recent efforts for an organization to try to bring fighters together in an effort to wrest some of the power, per se, from the UFC back to the fighters. And this is going to be a great conversation. I may have to have it with myself, but this is going to be a conversation that we're going to see not only develop within the next 30 days to the next couple years, but this is going to be something long term that I think is really going to impact the sport. So we're going to talk about it from a couple of different angles today. Definitely go over what occurred during the conference call that was held earlier today, and also discuss, how fighters reacted, what should we see next, just some initial thoughts and questions about not only this organization, but how the sport will revolve or respond as a whole. So first and foremost, let's talk about the news that broke. At 4 p.m. today, there was a conference call held where the former promoter, I believe he may have been president too, Bjorn Rebney, and five prominent well, I'll say four prominent UFC fighters, and George St. Pierre announced this organization. And they announced basically, like, they announced the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association, and much of the MMA community was at the computer, either on the call, listening to the call, watching live updates. And there's a lot of interesting information that came out. Those athletes that were involved were former welterweight champion George St. Pierre, former heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez, uh, who was former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, multiple time title challenger Donald Cerrone, and who am I forgetting? Former Strikeforce contender and current top 10 middleweight Tim Kennedy. So this is a pretty interesting group of guys, because it's not a bunch of lower ranked athletes, or it's not guys that can be easily pushed to the wayside. These are some men who are at the or who are close enough to the top of the sport. Definitely some interesting names within the competition and within the UFC as a whole. But they certainly had a lot to say about the association. So I'm going to dive into some of the highlights that were tweeted out from the conference call and break them down. So first and foremost, they talked about the the formation of the association. I want to make sure that we get into that. We kind of get into that minutia because this is not a fighters union. There's a difference between an association and a union. There are different opportunities that are available, different powers, different. I'm using the terminology rights in air quotes right now that are afforded to individuals that are within both groups. So when you think about it from a sports perspective, there's associations such as the what you see in golf and tennis. Those aren't unions per se, but those are associations that have come together with the best interest of players in mind. For example, when it comes to female tennis players, it was their association that pushed for equal pay for big name tournaments and events. For the longest time, women's tennis players were not paid the same amount of money as male tennis players. So it was organizations such as that association which pushed for those changes. So you should think of this association along those lines as opposed to the groups that are relevant in the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, or NFL. This is a different set of organization which has different rights and different powers. And again, I use the word rights in an air quotes type of sense right now, just so you can understand where I'm coming from. But let's look back into this, and what one of the first probably interesting points I saw was that they necessarily didn't talk about who's funding the organization, which is interesting because the way Beyond Revenue presented is like this group is not out to make money. So you have to wonder who's funding such an important organization at an important time in a sport that is growing and there is revenue opportunities there, but who's funding this organization if there isn't an apparent return on investment? So that's probably, I think, like one of the first questions that's going to come out. And during this press conference, GSP did most of GSP and Tim Kennedy did probably most of the talking. Velasquez and Dillashaw didn't do so much. Cerrone hopped in there every now and then with Rebney as well, who definitely said a lot. But it was GSP's comments were very interesting. He spoke. One of the things that he said that caught my eye probably the most is that he is one of the few fighters that are both healthy and wealthy, which is very interesting because like you see in combat sports, you don't often see guys walk away at a time where they have both of those things in their back pocket. They don't have the health and they don't have the wealth. We often talk about guys such as Wanderlei Silva, who's actually about to fight later on this month against Mirko Cro Cop. Why is he still in there fighting at 40 years old, putting himself in extreme danger? And he's fighting for a promotion where the finances may not be there for him to get as much as he thinks he's worth. So obviously, that's probably the biggest statement I took from GSP, that he is both healthy and wealthy at a point in his life where he can take the risk of joining this association with the purpose of improving the quality of life, quality of career for fighters. He also spoke about agents and fighters being threatened by the UFC, and he in his own words, he said a lot of agents and fighters will be threatened by the UFC. We're not going to be brought to shut up, which is interesting again, because he spoke about fighters being afraid of stepping forward. He spoke about fighters, taking this risk because it's what's best for their career, and it makes me think what has happened in his career personally and in others that makes him so adamant that these type of threats, these type of claims are going to come out against him. It harkens back to when he pushed so hard for PED testing, more stringent PED testing in mixed martial arts. And he actually spoke about this as well when he said that, he was one of the first ones to openly speak about PED testing, to harp on the topic, even so much so that Dana White kind of took an underhanded dig at him for that conversation at one point in time. And he also mentioned, JSP mentioned that he made those strides to push for that type of testing, and it eventually happened. So if he's stepping in here to do the same type of thing to push for a fighters association, maybe that same type of change will come. Another interesting piece of news that came out of the press conference today is that the initial board of this association, is made up of GSP, Cerrone, Kane, um, Dillashaw, and Kennedy. Rebney is just an advisor of sorts. And again, this brings up another great question and conversation, because if you watched this story unfold, especially through Twitter and even on Instagram, you saw a lot of fighters and a lot of individuals who were a part of Bellator at one point in time, or not even necessarily a part of Bellator, but who have interesting insights into Rebney as a promoter. They talked about not trusting him. King Mo put out a tweet about Rebney being a dick rider from that infamous press conference after he fought Rampage, where they went back and forth about that. And he talked about these guys needing to watch him, not being or getting finessed, as he put, by Rebney. Julie Kedzie took to her Twitter profile and said that she's not that trusting of Rebney as a promoter. And this is something, and Jonathan Snowden, because Rebney made the comment that he's always treated fighters right within their contracts. And Jonathan Snowden, from formerly from Bleacher Report, now I think he's with the Flow Sports brand, but he sent out a tweet linking an article that he wrote about Eddie Alvarez and his fight to get out from his Bellator contract. So you're already seeing some proverbial red flags being brought up about Rebney's involvement. Where does it begin? Where does it end? He's listed as just an advisor, but what does that really mean? So that's another big question that came out from that came from the show that people are now beginning to ask. So yeah, that's definitely something I would like to see answered down the line. Something else that came up was the idea of a labor strike, and again, people hopped on that because associations associations run the risk of legal ramifications if they were to implement any type of labor strike. I mean, think about that. Think about guys who, for example, I think of who's fighting at UFC 206. I think Donald Cerrone's fighting. Let me look real quick. Because all except for Velasquez, I think all of these guys have fights scheduled in the coming months, and it makes you wonder, like, what type of ramifications will these guys face? That's the biggest question I have. Are we going to see the UFC treat these guys in any different type of manner in light of this development? Like, let me see. So UFC 206. Donald Cerrone is fighting, and Tim Kennedy. They're both fighting at UFC 206. And then Dillashaw is fighting at 207, I believe. Let me look really quickly. Okay, he's not fighting here. I think he's fighting in early January. But Dillashaw has a fight lined up, and as does. Check real quick. I'm not so sure about Kane. I'm not sure when his next fight is. Let me look. It's actually a good question. Sometimes I hate Sherdog's website. Cain Velasquez is also fighting at UFC 207. So yeah, I mean these guys they have fights coming up next. I wonder how the UFC will respond to them after this big development. They did release an official statement earlier, a few hours back, where it was just a simple one line: "We respect all of our athletes and are always open and willing to hear their thoughts on how to improve the sport." The UFC official did not answer any additional questions, but it was interesting to see that they at least responded at this point in time. It'll be interesting to see, what type of questions are sent towards Dana White, and if he'll even address them. I wouldn't be surprised if he does not address any questions, or at least not at this point in time, to kind of let more like a wait and see type ordeal. I find it one another interesting comment that came out during the press conference was that CAA, the talent agency which represents GSP and some other fighters, which is a direct competitor to WME IMG, who now owns the UFC, to see CAA, they're not necessarily backing financially the association, but they have since, according to what I understood, that they have presented support to this movement, and you wonder, and that there has to be some competitive interest there for CAA from an industry perspective when they're taking the stance against WME IMG, which is not only the owners of the UFC, but they manage such fighters. I think they manage John Jones, Ronda Rousey, and a few others. So that's going to be another story, another aspect of this that is worth watching, worth keeping a very close eye on, because it's something that needs to be understood and something that needs to be reconciled. It's something that I think everybody should focus on and kind of talk about in the future. Then there's what else? There's so much came out from this. In fact, one of their statements was, this is another quote from the press conference. The MMAAA says they don't want to outline the specifics of what they are doing or what they have planned, so WME doesn't get a leg up on them. Let's see what else is coming back. When asked if there's other fighters that are on board, Bjorn said that there's going to be some more announcements in the coming weeks. You saw some fighters taking to their social media profiles to pledge their support or their interest, or just being excited about the potential. And yeah, it was interesting to see those men and women speak up about being interested in this this development. I mean, you saw individuals from Francisco Rivera to who else? Nick Lance and others say that they're interested in where this goes. What I think is very interesting is that Bjorn mentioned that right now this association is focused just on the UFC. Obviously, because the UFC is the biggest promotion in the world, it's the biggest promotion in the sport, and that's where all of the money comes in. 400 billion, or excuse me, $4 billion that they were just sold for. A lot of money on the table. A lot of money on the table. A lot of money to be made. So I understand why they're focusing on that organization first. But at some point in time, they're going to have to begin to, in my personal opinion, I question why don't they gain a stronger foothold in other promotions. They made it apparent that they're not focused on other promotions right now. But when you look at how Bellator is growing, you're looking at some other opportunities, the way newer stars are being developed on the regional scene, there may be some opportunity there. However, we'll have to see if forcing the issue with the UFC, will it continue to impact some of the smaller smaller promotions. And what was another interesting tidbit that kind of breaks off of that is I was had a quick back and forth with Julie Kesey, and she mentioned that she would like to see some more diversity on this board or with people that are involved. And right now, that group consisted of the group that was front and center consisted of GSP, Cerrone, Dillashaw, Kennedy, and Velasquez, and there were no women, but also there weren't any fighters from Bellator. Obviously, you have Rebney being there, another individual who has a past with Bellator is a part of the Zach Light, who is a former matchmaker for Bellator, is a part of the association as well. But right now, there aren't any fighters directly from the promotion, so I think that that'll be another story to watch, spawning from the development of this athletic association. So yeah, like there's still going to be so much that's out there, so much to glean from this development. I'm looking forward to seeing what a lot of the media experts have to say about this, because necessarily fighters may not be able to say what they want right out the gate. Some of them may kind of wait and bide their time before making a comment, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the experts, especially some of the legal experts who follow the sport, such as Patrick Wyman, people who have a more analytical background within the MMA media or within sports journalism, how they look at this development and see what some of the impacts are, or whether some of the potential impacts will be down the line. As I mentioned, I think one of the biggest stories to watch is to see how the UFC um, reacts to that. And it's not going to be, they're not going to stand up and fire all these guys at once, even though they do have a precedent of doing that precedent with doing that with how they handled AKA for not being wanting to sign over all of their rights. So we've seen some hard-handed stuff go down in the past. Let me see. There's so much to watch over the next few weeks. Again, I'm working on a piece for Fansided. You'll probably see in December about how 2016 will be remembered as a year that fighters basically fought back. Um, because you see so many athletes pushing for free agency, you see so many athletes doing what they need to do to put themselves first, that it's becoming a trend. And I think that today's news announcement is just the next step in that progression. Schwan, how you doing there, sir?
Oh, not bad at all. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. Doing very well. So tell me, man, where were you when the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association was announced today?
I was at work. I was just working, and I've heard about it, and I was actually heard about it through Twitter, and I wasn't surprised. I was kind of surprised with the names attached to it, but I wasn't surprised that this sort of step was made. I mean, it's been coming for a long time.
So yeah, let's definitely talk about that, man, because obviously that's probably the biggest news story from today. We're going to spend a few more minutes on this before jumping into some of the analyzing of the fights this coming weekend. But what were your initial thoughts? You said that you were surprised to see some of the names that were attributed to this. I was as well. But what were some of your initial thoughts on this situation?
Well, seeing Donald Cerrone there was very caught me off guard because Cerrone's always been one of the favorites with the UFC, and the UFC has never been a proponent of any sort of mixed martial arts union or anything of that kind. Any group where the fighters kind of group up and team up against the promotions. And it's kind of odd to see a guy who's been in favor with the UFC and kind of been one of what you would call not a company man is how he acts, but the opportunities given and the push they've put into him. To see him standing on the side of something that the UFC has never really fully endorsed or backed up. I think Tim Kennedy, that doesn't shock me. Cain Velasquez doesn't shock me. George St. Pierre does not shock me. But having Donald Cerrone up there kind of caught me off guard a little bit.
The Cain one did kind of shock me a bit, just because they've given him so many opportunities to be the man. Taking a classic Ric Flair line, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And Cain Velasquez was the man. They wanted to build Mexico around him. They've given him time and time again. I mean, how many times has he been in the title picture or a fight away from the title picture? He's been and he's probably one of the most least active big names that you'll see. So he surprised me probably the most, and Cerrone was definitely second. I'm not too surprised with Cerrone just because he's been vocal about the need of a fighters union, or this being the association. So I'm not too surprised about that. This is a question that's kind of been played. Go ahead. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about Cain Velasquez, because I mean he's been constantly injured, and they've constantly kept him in the title contention. So I guess I understand that to a certain degree. But Cerrone's just a guy who always gets. I mean, they really pushed Cerrone. Dana's always pushed him. He's always been a big fan of his. Donald Cerrone's never really gotten the bad end of it, as far as not getting a fight or not getting paid a fairly high sum of money for his fights. To my knowledge, he's never been one of those guys. He's never been one of those guys who's really struggled within the UFC as far as making paydays. And it has to do with his popularity. A lot of guys have as many fights as him, are similarly ranked, but they don't get the paydays, they don't get the opportunities that he has. And maybe it's partly because they don't take fights on short notice like he does. But when you see a guy who's been in the favor of an organization doing something that's the total opposite of that organization, it kind of catches you off guard. I mean, if they would have had Jose, it wouldn't have shocked me, because of the way Jose Aldo had been talking over the past 2 years. But Donald Cerrone, I don't remember him ever really mentioning anything regarding fighter pay or fighter unions at all. I don't think I've ever heard him say anything of that nature.
It's been rather recent. I want to say within the last month or so, that there was that video interview of him talking about being willing to be the face of a fighters union if it was needed. But this has definitely been within the last man, I would say 30 days, but that may even be too much. But it's definitely new.
I mean, it's a good move with the way the UFC was sold and the money they make. It is somewhat ridiculous, the money they get paid, the fact that some people aren't regularly getting fights, the fact that they really have no leverage in the organization. I mean, at some point, someone's got to do something to bring some kind of quality control to it, to where people are making a functional living salary, and if they're not making very much, they're at least fighting enough where that money comes out, the money evens out to their expenditures. Because as you know, MMA is a very expensive sport to compete in. It's not like boxing or any other sport where it's essentially your team takes care of this, or you have to focus on this one discipline. You have to focus on multiple disciplines. You have to bring in all sorts of people. There's just a lot of extra expenses that go into it that other sports don't have. And for combat sports like boxing, you get signed if you're a big enough name, you get signed by a promoter coming out of the amateurs. They kind of take some of that expense off you. That's why you don't hear some of the blue chip boxing prospects talking about the money and the cost for the diets and all that kind of stuff, because they have a promoter who gives them a signing bonus, signs into a contract, finds them fights, and keeps them active and moves them up the ranking. The UFC is kind of the promoter and the organization, so they move as they choose. They do what they want. They don't have any real motivation to move guys up or to take care of guys if they don't want to, if it doesn't fit their agenda, because they have nothing invested in these guys. They don't invest money in these guys. They pay them for doing a job. They don't invest money. So you getting another fight so that you can feed your family doesn't affect my bottom line. The only time I need to call you is if I have a short notice fight and I need to bring you in. So there's no investment. It's very one-sided. That's why you have so many guys who jump in on short notice fights and take whatever matchups. They need to make money.
There was an interesting interview with Cole Miller from this week. I wrote about that, and a lot of people covered it just because, Cole Miller isn't a star. He isn't a big name. He's been in the UFC for just about 10 years. His record is I think it was 10-8-1 that I saw as I reviewed this. But he talked about the frustration and how difficult it was for him, because he had a fight lined up that was he was supposed to fight BJ Penn. That fight was nixed. Then he was supposed to be on the Manila card, UFC Fight Night 97. That whole card was scrapped. So, he talks about the frustration about doing all these training camps, only not getting paid for them, and what he goes through as a fighter and how it's impacting his willingness to fight and his frustration, and how it's impacting his interest in competing at this level. And man, it's a powerful interview that I think everyone should listen to. They're probably not going to. I wrote a piece about it yesterday for Fansided, but it speaks directly to what you're talking to now. And he was one of the people who came out on Twitter today basically being so in love with the idea of a fighters association. And when he said something really interesting. He was he tweeted that he would be in tears right now if he had that level of emotion left for mixed martial arts. So, it seems like he's drained, and I won't be surprised if other fighters are in the same boat as him.
Well, it was we talked about this probably a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where I mentioned an interview Matt Mitrione did with Ariel Helwani, I think, and he was discussing about when you go into MMA, there's no retirement plan, and being a good fighter, the only payoff for that is if you win fights and you get bigger purses. If you have a college degree, because he said the thing that MMA guys always say, the promoters say, we have such smart guys, they're former gold medalists, they're college degrees, they teach, they do all this stuff. He's like, when you get that degree, when you don't use it, the value of that degree goes away. I might have a degree in computer science, but if I haven't used it in 10 years, it's worthless to me when my fighting career is over. If I have an experience coaching, but I stop coaching so I can focus on my fight career, being away 5, 6, 7 years out of coaching essentially eliminates my ability to get back into that career and get a livable salary. And he kept bringing up the point that there's a lot of expense and there's a lot of effort put in when nothing is really ever in cement. They kind of adjust on the fly. If they can come up with a better matchup, a sexier matchup, if they need if you're supposed to fight a name guy and they need a name guy for someone else, they'll take that name guy right out of your fight and put him somewhere else, which is great for him and great for their card, but not great for you. Anybody who does combat sports, or really sports at all, is really... I know everybody says that being a cage fighter is the toughest and hardest thing in the world. I've never done it, so maybe it is. But there's the tough part about it is the insecurity. You don't have any security. You never know when your next paycheck is going, even if you're with the UFC. There's people who've been with the UFC who fought twice in 2 years. How do you make a living? What do you do? How do you pay your bills? Some people start getting real jobs. Other people take boxing matches. Any way they can further by making money. But it's a very risky career, and it's about time someone stepped in to kind of, like I said, put some quality control and maybe get it to the point where people can have a functional, livable salary, which would increase the level of MMA we see, and it would increase the longevity of people's careers, because you don't know how many quality fighters or great fighters we missed out on just because they're like, I can't make a living off this. I got a wife and kids. I can't do this. I can't afford to pay my gym fees and not fight for 6 months to a year. Think of all the women fighters who you haven't seen in months. You've seen a fight in July, you haven't seen them since. You saw them fight last October, you haven't seen them fight since. How do you raise a family? How do you take care of yourself? How do you continue training with everybody who wants their money when you're not getting any from the job you actually have a job, multi-billion-dollar company, and yet you make no money for them because you're not working. It's like being a temp who at a temp agency and they don't give you assignments. Yeah, you have a job, but you're not making any money because you're not working.
Very true points there, man. Very, very true points. The last thing I wanted to bring up here is like, what do you think is the biggest news story or the biggest question to watch after today? What should we look for the most from this story?
The fact that Rebney's involved, a lot of fighters don't like him. Like if this was somebody like Scott Coker, who has a really good reputation among fighters and taking care of fighters and giving them good contracts, and if he's going to use them and put them in a tough matchup, he's going to make sure they get paid and get sponsorships. I could see a lot of people being more favorable with this because he's a guy who has these relationships and he just has the sort of stability and friendliness and dependability that fighters like, if fighters gravitate to. Rebney's been considered somewhat of a con man to some people. Like when he was running Bellator, he was low wages and arguing with them to pay them that. So I think one of the biggest stories is how is this going to be received among fighters and among agents and the managers who've had to deal with him, or who've had other fighters who've had to deal with him, or even fighters who've had teammates who've had to deal with him. Are they going to be willing to sign on with this guy who might have screwed their training partner, or who might have pissed off their manager because their manager wanted more money and he lowballed an offer for them? It's like guys who are very guys who generate that sort of reaction, kind of polarizing, that have that polarizing personality. You swing on extremes, and for this to be effective, you have to have a lot of on and back it up. And Rebney's never had the reputation of a guy who's been able to draw support and get people in behind him. Now, having these big name stars helps, but I think a lot of people are going to be gun shy because of his history as a promoter and as a businessman.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that. Before you got on today, I talked about how some people have expressed concern. Like Julie Kedzie was basically open about it today. King Mo is open about it, how they've expressed concern, about working with him. My biggest story, I think, is I want to see how the UFC responds and they already issued an official response, but I want to see how they treat these individuals. Like, all these guys are fighting coming up. TJ Dillashaw has a fight, I think, in January. Kane, Kennedy, and Cerrone are fighting on UFC 206 next weekend, I believe that is. But I want to see how the UFC treats these guys, especially if you see some of them win, some of them lose. Like, will it be 8 months before we see Donald Cerrone fight again? Will Tim Kennedy be gone for another year before he steps to the octagon? That's what I want to see. I want to see how not how the UFC responds publicly, but what we see from a business standpoint. Are these guys going to find themselves blackballed? Like, remember, like the UFC at one point in time, they wanted, when they initially started doing their video games, they expected fighters to sign over their likeness rights in perpetuity. Team AKA didn't want to do that, and they cut the whole team. Fitch, Koscheck, all those guys, when they were at the top of their game, they cut them all at one fell swoop. So it will be interesting to see how the UFC responds to these guys from a behind-the-scenes standpoint.
Well, the main issue I have with that is that all the guys, with the exception of Cerrone and GSP, they're needle movers, as Dana White says. I mean, it's not like Nate Diaz is out there. It's not like Nick Diaz is out there. It's not like Conor McGregor is out there. It's Cain Velasquez. His pay-per-views don't sell anything. He's not a guy who brings in millions of dollars to the company. It's Tim Kennedy. I don't even know he's popular among MMA fans for the most part. Cain Velasquez, Tim Kennedy, now Donald Cerrone, he has a fan base, but he's not a Conor McGregor. He's not a GSP. I mean, GSP would be the biggest name guy, and he's not even an active fighter right now. So, I mean, most of the guys who are stepping up, they're big names in the MMA world, but they're not big names overall. It's like if Floyd Mayweather says we need to have a union for boxers, because Floyd's the biggest thing in or out of boxing, whether he's in or out of boxing. Cain Velasquez, the heavyweight division's moved on fine without you. Tim Kennedy, he's a good fighter. I've heard he's a great training partner and good teacher. But did anybody of note who really matters as far as the bottom line, did anybody really miss Tim Kennedy? And I'm not saying that disrespectfully, but seriously, did anybody miss Tim Kennedy?
Nope. And what's funny is like, I'm not even going to comment on Tim Kennedy right now because I've had some issues with him, but I'm not, or not personally, but not personally, but just looking at some of the stuff he says publicly, I just struggle with it. But yeah, so this is going to be a story to watch. I think I'm working on a piece right now about 2016 being a year that fighters fought back. So yeah, I think that this is the biggest story to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next. So let's move forward. Let's talk about what else is coming on, what else is going on this week. And we have a fight card this weekend, man. We have the Tough finale, Season 24 finale, and we also have an important fight over in Bellator with Eduardo Dantas and Joe Warren. So let's look at this card, man. There's a couple of fights from both cards I want to talk about. Let's I guess since Bellator their event is first, let's talk about this main event, man. Eduardo Dantas and Joe Warren. Joe Warren is someone who has been around for a long time. Will never leave the Bellator title picture. And then you have Eduardo Dantas, a guy who I think is one of the top bantamweights outside of the UFC, and he's one of those guys I would like to see fight in the UFC, maybe even fight against a Marlon Moraes and see where these guys really stand against each other. But yeah, break down this fight for me, man. Tell me what you think of both competitors here.
I'm actually a Joe Warren fan. I mean, I like his whole shtick about being the baddest man on the planet. Even though I get it, it's been the opposite has been proven multiple times. I still like his act. I like how he sells himself. A world-class athlete, but the fact of the matter is he's getting up there in age, and he's actually on the decline physically. He's not able to physically manhandle and do the things that he's been used to doing to guys when he first got into Bellator, because he's been in Bellator for a while. People forget that. He hasn't just been in here for a year or two. He's been in Bellator for a while, and even prior to that, he was one of the older guys, so he's not as physically dominant as he used to be. His biggest advantage is his physicality and his ability to control guys, get guys down and control guys on the ground. He gets on top. He's made a career out of basically smothering guys, chipping them up with little short punches and controlling them on the ground, and basically wearing them out in clinches, taking them out, and then controlling them. They might put them in some danger, a risk of a reversal here, maybe a scramble there. Before essentially, he's like a smaller version of Chael Sonnen when it comes down to a fight. He just grinds on you, takes you down, and controls you, and basically works you over and wins decisions on points. Not necessarily by doing huge amounts of damage, but just by outworking guys and controlling them and essentially shutting their game down. I don't think he's got the athleticism anymore to consistently do that against guys who are dangerous in multiple areas, which Dantas is. Dantas is a wrestler, but with his athleticism and explosiveness, he's able to get guys down. He's able to get takedowns. He's able to win scrambles. And on the ground, as far as actual submission work, with his athleticism, he's a very dynamic finisher. He can finish from almost anywhere. Off of counters, you can take him down and he can catch you in between the point you got your legs around his hips, and you can put him on the ground. He's just a fully fleshed out, well-balanced fighter. The issue he had before was a lack of seasoning, and in my opinion, a little bit of lack of poise, but that comes from not being experienced against a certain caliber of opponent. Now that he's fully made that adjustment, I don't really see how Warren beats him, because Joe Warren hits hard and he's tough, but his shin, in my opinion, isn't what it used to be, and his stand-up has just never been very good. It's been functional at best. His defense isn't really great. He doesn't put combinations together. Basically, a couple shots and he gets into a clinch. His game is very simple and it's very predictable. It's just, I guess, a head nod to him that he's been able to work this game at a fairly high level for the majority of his career. But when I think of ways that he can win this fight, he can, of course, win a decision and grind it out. But if Dantas comes out and puts a pace on him and actually forces him to fight all 5 rounds. And what I mean by that is even when he's taken down, you're trying to create scrambles. You're trying to hit the reversals. You're trying to hit a switch. You're trying to find a submission. If he makes him work for all 5 rounds, I don't think Joe Warren, his cardio will hold up. I mean, part of the reason his cardio hasn't been tested is because of that ground control. But I don't think he's going to be able to control Dantes on the ground. I don't think he's going to be able to hang with him on the feet. And if Dantes makes a point of making him fight every minute of the fight, I think he's going to gas and end up getting finished. I would like to see him win because I just like the guy and I like his tough, gritty kind of style. But when I look at it from a technical and strategical point of view, I don't know how he wins this at this point, unless Dantes has clearly underestimated him, which I don't think he has because he already has a loss to him. So he has no reason to think that he's way better or that he can't lose or that Warren's not dangerous. He's already lost his belt as a result. So I'm thinking that he comes out there and he wins this fight and wins it handily. He might get a finish, but he'll most likely win a decision. But if he actually pushes the pace, he'll probably finish Warren inside of 4.
Okay. So you got him finishing the fight inside of 4 rounds. Let's look at another big Bellator fight that's going on this weekend. I didn't just realize that they also have 2 cards set up, one for Friday and one for Saturday. Joe Timangelo, hopefully I said that right, is rematching Darian Caldwell. I'm not sure if you saw their first fight, but
I didn't.
Caldwell is someone who I'm very interested in, especially after what he did to Joe Warren, throwing him around. But he was winning this fight, the first fight against Joe, and then got submitted by a surprise guillotine choke in the 3rd round, 9 seconds in. It was probably one of the bigger upsets that we would have seen in like the last few months. So these 2 guys are rematching. Darian Caldwell is a freak. I expect him to win this fight. He was winning majority of the last fight before getting caught. Talk to me about this fight if you're aware and interested in these 2 men. How do you see it going?
I was interested in the first fight because Caldwell is so dynamic, and I never seen anybody do what he did to Joe Warren. Like, he just dominated him from every possible angle, just blew him out, manhandled him. And you very rarely see Joe get manhandled. Maybe out-slicked, maybe outworked on the feet and out-techniqued on the feet or on the ground. But you've never seen him just get bullied and manhandled and pushed around. And that's what Caldwell did to him. That was very impressive to me. And but a good friend of mine, King Mo, was telling me about the fight. And he said, just look out for this guy because this guy Caldwell's fighting is very seasoned. He's very experienced. He's not afraid. He'll take some chances and he'll push it. If Caldwell gives him an inch, he's gonna walk him down. He's gonna put some pressure on him. So you just don't think this is gonna be a walkover because in my mind it was clear Caldwell was just gonna blow through this guy. And pretty much what happened was when it wasn't easy for Caldwell, he kind of collapsed under the pressure. He started forcing shots, confidence in his stand-up. He wasn't putting shots together. Once he started eating shots, he didn't want to exchange anymore. He didn't want to be offensive. He started playing a safety-first wrestle game that his physical skill set or his technical skill set. And that's essentially what lost him the fight. He just panicked, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that to downgrade him or downgrade his mental toughness. I think he was, for once in his life, he was in a tough fight where his athleticism wasn't able to clearly dominate his opponent. And once that happened, he didn't know what to do. It's like a guy who's used to just throwing people around or landing punches left and right. Once you can't do that, if you haven't worked on working your way in or slowly improving position or carefully setting up shots, then you have no idea how to do it when in a stressful situation. And that's exactly what happened to him. He was in a stressful situation with the guy who wasn't giving him any easy openings or any easy escapes. He panicked and he got beat as a result. That's all there's to it. So the question is, in this time, has he gotten a better grasp on his overall skill set and his mental toughness? Because this guy has shown that he's not going to go away. And now this guy's got confidence. I've already beat blue chip, big name, high profile prospect. I beat him, and I beat him, made it look fairly easy. So now he's got confidence. That guy's going to come in looking better, feeling sharper, ready to win again, his position in that division. So the question on my end is, has Caldwell really worked on his poise Is he prepared to work out of tough spots? Is he prepared to work his way into situations, or is he just going to depend on his athleticism and say, "Hey, I could have blown this guy out if not for this"? Is he going to basically make excuses? If he's going to make excuses and just say the guy got lucky, he just caught me, the same thing's going to happen again because the guy didn't get lucky. The guy outworked him and the guy outsmarted him, and he got desperate and he got taking bad shots. He started taking bad angles and he paid for it. That's all that happened. He had the fight won, and then he just made an egregious mistake. It cost him the fight. It wasn't anything complex that was being done. He just wasn't taking the correct steps to set up whatever he was trying to do. He was just trying to leap into it. He was just trying to play it safe. He just got desperate. Sure, since then, I don't know. He hasn't really been active, and I figure he's got to win. If he doesn't win, then that's another big name prospect that Bellator's brought in who's been exposed. So I'm going to say that he's going to win because I think he really wants it. I think he really is serious about this, but I can't say that with any real confidence because he should have lost the first fight. Even if it was a contested, tight win for him, he should have won it the first time. There was no reason for him to lose that fight. He had almost every kind of advantage except the experience advantage, and that was enough for him to give the.
You there? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. So, like, those are the two Bellator fights that I'm kind of most interested in. There's a couple other guys. AJ McKee is back in the cage. Marco Scalval is there. Anthony Njokuani's brother, Chidi Njokuani, is fighting as well. But those are kind of like the biggest fights that I'm looking forward to seeing this weekend when it comes to their organization.
One more thing about Bellator. As you know, I did that piece about Bellator, the problem they have. And these two cards kind of highlights this problem. They only have, like you said, there's one or two fights that you're really interested in. And on any legitimate card, there should be at least two or three, And Bellator just doesn't have it. It's always somebody else's brother, and it's always somebody who might not be at a certain skill level or might not be known enough to draw in other fans. And it's the same problem they're having with Joe Warren. Joe Warren's fighting for the title for how many times? Because the division isn't deep enough where you can have multiple guys rising up and rising down. It's always this cycle. For a while, it was a cycle of Galval contests, just over and over. Just like a featherweight, it was Karan and Strauss and one of the Pitbull brothers. We just don't have the depth to create new and exciting stars, to develop new and exciting stars, or create new and exciting matchups. You're just seeing different versions of the same fight repeatedly. And that's what hurts their brand. It's not that they don't have good fights at the top, because they do, but it's just something you've already seen multiple times, or something you were about to see multiple times. There's none of that new, fresh excitement of a new challenger or a dynamic challenger. It's this guy who is on the decline, getting yet another title shot, and a guy who's clearly shown he's the future of the division, having to fight somebody who for all intents and purposes maybe doesn't deserve a rematch because he's only won one fight since then. That it's just the same problem that's kind of plagued Bellator as they've been trying to expand themselves and make themselves the actual competitor to the UFC and not an alternative. The card just kind of highlight.
Yeah, and I saw your piece this week. I meant to promote it a little more for you too, but it was definitely a good breakdown on their struggles and what they need to do to kind of turn the game around. So I appreciate you contributing to MMA Ratings that way. You're always contributing here on the show, so it's good to see you getting some written content out there as well. Looking forward to what comes next from that. Let's see. We are going to look at this UFC event this weekend where we have the Ultimate Fighter 24 finale. We got. I don't know if the last episode of the show has happened yet. I think Tim Elliott is the one who won, and he will be facing Demetrius Johnson this weekend. I think, but I really don't care because I'm not too excited about the Ultimate Fighter anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of been they've done so many versions of it, and it's kind of lost. It's kind of lost any sort of real pizzazz it has because usually they don't have a high enough level of talent on the show. Not saying these guys can't fight or they're not tough. But they're not. Most of the guys who come on the show aren't UFC talent. aren't legitimate UFC talents, and you see that when they get in the cage, and it's kind of also contributed to the UFC being kind of overfilled with many fighters who, while tough and very serious about their craft, A plus level, A minus level, B plus, B or B minus level. It's a lot of C plus and C minus level fighters who get to fight in the Super Bowl of mixed martial arts because the UFC has all these shows they have to put on to meet their contract needs. So the quality of the fights from the quality of the card, the quality of the fights varies from the top of the card to the bottom because they have so many guys. A lot of them coming from the Ultimate Fighter on their card fighting, and they're just not ready to be at this level. And often, if they work their way up through those lower levels, the first time they face a legitimate guy, they often get smoked. So the Ultimate Fighter, while initially it was groundbreaking, innovative, it's kind of got into a kind of mundane pattern of, trash talk, drunk threats, so-so fights, and just a lot of unnecessary drama that doesn't really help push the sport forward or the fighters. This season's been a little bit better because they brought in champions and guys who are all UFC level type fighters, so the fights have been better, and you have more. But once again, it still goes back to the same routine and the same act with the show every year once it gets past a certain point.
Yeah, it definitely does become like a wash, rinse, and repeat type thing. So let's look at some of the fights from this weekend. I don't know if it was accidentally revealed that Tim Elliott did win the season this year, so he will be facing Demetrius Johnson. Break that fight down for me, man. Tim Elliott is a guy who I liked when he was in the UFC. I thought he was an interesting. He was an interesting fighter across the board, active, always looking to push the pace, keep the action going. But he's stepping in there with, in my opinion, the pound-for-pound best fighter in the sport today. So talk to me about what you expect to see between Demetrius Johnson and Tim Elliott.
I really hate to say this, but ever since I watched the show, at least most of the season, and the biggest thing that stuck out to me is a lot of these guys, as good as they are in individual disciplines, they didn't seem to have a lot of balance in all areas of MMA. Like, they might be really good wrestlers, but their striking and their grappling so-so. They're great grapplers, but their wrestling and striking so-so. Or they're competent in all areas, but they don't have any real sort of defining skill set. And against a guy like Demetrius Johnson, that's a killer because Demetrius Johnson, his biggest tool is his versatility, his ability to transition. But the second biggest tool he has of that is he actually has depth in every area that he fights in. He has depth in wrestling. He has depth in his grappling. So even if you're a master in one area, he's good enough where you're just not going to run him over. You're not just going to dominate him at boxing range. You're not going to dominate him at kicking range. If you get into scrambles, you're just not going to dominate him there. He's good enough in any area that he can survive if he's forced to stay in that area for a particular length of time. He can even be effective from that spot. And a lot of guys who fight in MMA, they don't have that. They're desperate to stay on their feet. They're so desperate to stay on their feet that they don't develop a solid grappling game, or they're so desperate to get the fight to the ground they take sloppy shots. You never see him forcing techniques. You never see him grasping for techniques because he has enough skill and confidence in every area that he's going to go through the progression of what needs to be done based off what's happening, not based off of I can't grapple at all, I need to get back up and give up a submission, or I can't strike at all, I need to force a shot and get submitted or get kneed in the head. He's allowed to have a more free-flowing and comprehensive game because he's developed a certain amount of skill in every single range in every single area. And Tim Elliott, he's a guy with talent. He's a talented guy. He's a physical guy. Grappling skill. He's got competent striking skill. But the issue is, like, once again, he's not particularly adept in any one area. And even though he's got across the board skills, he doesn't show me a lot of nuance or subtlety in any of those areas. He's not like some high-class, world-class, detailed wrestler. He's not a high-class, world-class, detailed grappler. He's not a high-class, world-class, detailed striker. Now, you don't have to be world-class in any of those things, but your class as it pertains to MMA depends on how much you focus on the details of your game you have truly understand and fleshed out on all areas, whether it be offense, defense, or counters. I haven't seen that development from him. And maybe he's developed in the years he hasn't been in the UFC, but once again, who has he been facing? In my opinion, he's probably been facing guys who he has clear advantages over, and he's able to dominate in certain areas. he probably hasn't faced a lot of guys who can dominate him or shut him down. And when you're not facing that, the minute you get put in that situation in a fight, it causes you to panic because you don't know what to do. You don't know how to react because you're used to being the hammer, not the nail, and now it's been reversed on you. And that's what I see happening. I'm not always the biggest Demetrius Johnson fan. I've become more of one recently, but his technique and his dedication to the crafts, I don't know what area that Tim Elliott has any real advantage over Johnson in. On the feet, wrestling, on the ground. I don't know that he has any one area of strength over Johnson. Have an area where he's stronger than him in. He's not that much stronger because Demetrius Johnson is a student of the game. He understands all aspects inside and out to compete in this sport. He takes it like a job, and he's very committed to the process of becoming better, not just in one area, but all across the board. And then on top of that, he's learned how to seamlessly transition between ranges. I've never seen Tim Elliott do that. UFC, I've never seen him do it outside the UFC. So I don't know why I have any faith that he's going to do it now. And I'm not saying this to disrespect Tim Elliott. He's a very good fighter, but there's a reason why he came on The Ultimate Fighter this season, The Ultimate Fighter, because he wasn't fighting championship. He fought, he competed well, but he didn't win. So just by that logic alone, he's a level and a half below Demetrius Johnson, and I can't pick out any one area where I find the fight to be truly competitive on a technical or physical level. So I'm expecting Johnson to dominate unless something terribly wrong goes. I don't see how Tim Elliott wins this fight, and I don't mean that in any disrespect towards him, but nobody show me anything that says Tim Elliott can compete with him, much less beat him in any spot or in any way. Nobody's been able to tell me anything.
So, in my opinion, Johnson is the best in the sport today. And you mentioned something that even when you're at your best in one skill set, he kind of negates that and still finds a way to dominate you. I look back to the Henry Cejudo fight where everybody's like, how is he going to deal with Cejudo's wrestling? This is an Olympic gold medalist. What is he going to do? He goes out there and he dominates the guy. Not only did he get up from the first takedown, but he eventually takes him down as well and, finishes the fight. So, yeah, I'm looking for DJ to win there. There's an interesting piece on SureDog about if the UFC should continue investing in the flyweight division just because of what this guy's been able to do. And that's a whole other conversation, if he should move up, if he should do X, Y, and Z. But he is he's definitely one of the best, in my opinion, and he's the best pound for pound right now, regardless of what Conor McGregor has done.
Yeah, the thing about it is he's so detailed and he's so skillful in every situation. Conor McGregor is not a great grappler. Stipe Miocic is good on the feet, but he's not a great wrestler. You look at Demetrius Johnson, you say he has holes. He surely has holes, but the thing is, he's constantly working to minimize the holes or to transition into another area where that hole can't be exploited. Most guys don't do that. Most guys, even who consider themselves good strikers, if you really think about it, their footworks aren't that good. Their footwork isn't that great. Their setups aren't that great. Their entries aren't that great. Their defense isn't that great. They key in on one aspect of that art, and that's what they focus on. And they have all these other holes and shortcomings and weaknesses in that area that get exposed when they face somebody who can move a little bit, or someone who can jab, or someone who punches harder, or someone who can take a good shot, or someone who can force the pace. Demetrius Johnson trains like he's going to face a guy who's going to take away every single aspect, every single advantage he has, and he has to come up with a plan B and a plan C. And that's how you see him fight. Guys come out, I'm going to do this to him, I'm going to manhandle, I'm going to get in his face. They might have a couple rounds, they might have a round of success, they might have a moment of success, but then he adjusts. And he either takes you to an area you can't, because he can survive. He can survive in your area of strength. He can survive and he can compete with you in your area of strength. The question is, when he takes you to his area of strength, the clinch, can you survive with him there? Can you survive with him on the ground? Can you survive with him in wrestling scrambles? He can do everything you can do, and he can compete with you there. But when he starts turning up the heat and putting you in spots and positions you're not familiar with, the question is, can you compete with him? And every time he's asked that question to somebody, the answer has been no. Not a grappler, you can't do it. But you keep him on the feet where he's got to strike with you, and he's even money with you.
And it's often was a resounding no. So let's look at at this co-main event where we got Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo fighting the number one and number two in the weight class, fighting two guys who have been dominated by the current champion. And this is a good fight because I think it keeps these guys active, keeps them in a very intriguing fight, and also keeps them away from any other contenders pushing their way up the ladder. Break this fight down for me and tell me what you expect to come out of this bout.
Well, Cejudo, it's really hard to get a gauge on Cejudo because he's only shown so much. The keys to his winning the fight is in his wrestling. Athlete, he's a stronger athlete. He's the better athlete, and he's a better wrestler. The question is, has he grown enough in all the other areas of the game to really compete? Because against anybody else, I'd say that Cejudo is going to win this because he is a smart guy and he is physically tough and mentally tough. But the fact of the matter is he doesn't have enough seasoning. His manner of winning is all meat and potatoes. There's not a lot of complexity to his game and what he's trying to do. He's going to try and beat you up on the feet, tie you up, take you down, and work you over. He's going to try to, he can't get you on the feet, he's going to put you on the fence, and he's going to try to exhaust you and extend you. There's not a lot of subtlety to what he's doing. There's not a lot of layers to what he's doing from what I've seen. Huge step forward in the time since Demetrius Johnson lost, but I can't bet on things that I haven't seen under duress. The main concern I have for Joseph Benavidez is that he's been fighting a lot. He's been fighting really tough competition and pretty tough fights for the past couple of years, ever since he's lost to Johnson, trying to get that title fight back. And my question is, given the mileage he's put on himself as a result of these fights, is he basically right for the picking for Cejudo? Is this the time? Is this the best time to get Joseph Benavidez? Because I don't know that he's still in this sport or still at an elite level for the next 2, 4, 5 years. I don't know that because right now he's clearly above most people, but he's not so far above that he's just. Fights have been fairly competitive. The opponents he's fought have had their moments when facing it. Unlike Johnson, where guys are basically just being outclassed to the point where nobody wants to see the fight because you know what's going to happen. So the question is, has the wear and tear, the mileage, the consistent fighting, and the consistent tough fights caught up to Joseph Benavidez? I don't think it has. And if he's still fresh, if he's still sharp, I don't see how he loses this fight. He's the better submission grappler, striker, in my opinion. And he's more seasoned. Anything that Cejudo's coming, he doesn't face in the cage. He hasn't faced that level of wrestler, but he's faced good wrestler. He's faced athletic guys. He's faced guys who have a better set than Cejudo, and I think that's going to be the difference. I don't think Cejudo can match him in every aspect of an MMA match. He can out wrestle him, but we've seen that when a guy isn't completely flustered by his wrestling, that Cejudo has holes. And Cejudo hasn't been nearly as dominant with his wrestling and his physicality as people would expect an Olympic wrestler to be. I mean, guys have defended his takedown. He's had a hard time taking down lots of guys in the UFC. So it's not like it's an automatic gift that he's just going to be able to take guys down and control them and manhandle them. He couldn't control Johnson. He didn't control Formiga. I don't think that he controls Benavidez either. And I really think he should fight at a weight higher. And I think fighting at this weight, he's going to get tired. And when he gets tired, Benavidez is going to chop him down and probably stop him. There's Cejudo to win, but I think it takes a little bit more poise and a little bit deeper range of skills that he's shown at this stage. It's going to take more than just punching and kicking and wrestling. He's going to have some finesse and some cage IQ, and he didn't have that when he fought Demetrius Johnson. And the second best person in division is probably a tie between Horiguchi and Benavidez, but Benavidez being the more consistent and more seasoned guy, I'll say that Benavidez is the number 2 guy in division, and I don't think that Cejudo at this point has the skill set to beat him. He has all the physical tools, but I don't know that he has the all-round physical skill set to beat him.
Yeah, man, it's definitely a difficult conversation to have when you see where both these guys are in the division. That's always some great breakdowns that you give there, and looking at what both these guys have to offer when they step into the cage to face each other. There's a couple of other guys who I'm looking forward to seeing what they have when they compete this weekend at the finale. I'm looking at Gray Maynard, the fight between Gray Maynard and Ryan Hall. the Jorge Masvidal Jake Ellenberger fight. Alexis Davis and Sarah McMahon is interesting to see how far they've fallen off. Right now, those are the fights that jump out to me the most. Talk to me about Masvidal and Jake Ellenberger. I think that Masvidal is going to take this fight. Ellenberger's last win was more of a fluke, in my opinion. I'm not going to say fluke, but a flash in the pan. I'm going to pick Masvidal in this fight, but let's look at all of those and tell me what do you think.
I'd have to go with Masvidal, to be honest. I mean, he's a fighter over his career, and even late in his career, he's still shown himself able to compete with the better fighters in division. I mean, he had a very competitive loss to Lorenz Larkin, and he was a force at 155 in Strikeforce and in the UFC. The biggest issue with Masvidal is the same issue in every single fight. Is he going to give you a hard 3 rounds, or is he going to get a lead, score some shots, and then start cruising, where he starts slipping, ducking punches, basically making his opponent miss and not making his opponent pay? And that's what gets him in every single tough fight he's in. When he's busy and he's active and he's boxing and he's working the body and he's fighting in scrambles and he's threatening with submissions, he's a great guy. But the fact of the matter is, when he gets in tough fights or competitive fights, a guy will throw 5 punches, he'll block and slip them, but he won't make the guy pay. And he'll basically let guys outwork him to decision losses. And then he gets mad after the fact and he's like, I really won that fight. I did the most damage. Yeah, you did, but you didn't continue to do the damage. You didn't continue to impose your will. He's got all the skills. He's got physical ability. He's got mental toughness and physical durability. But the fact is, he's never been willing to mentally put his foot on the gas and push a pace for the entire length of a fight. And that's always cost him against the better guys. Now, Jake Ellenberger at this stage is not one of the better guys in division. He's just not. To be honest, I don't really think this fight should have been made, but he did come off an impressive win, so they're giving him another opportunity. I don't think Ellenberger wins it. He's the better wrestler, but Masvidal is hard to take down and he's hard to control. And regardless of what anybody tells me, Jake Ellenberger's chin still is suspect to me. He's put on better performances. The last one was a win. His last fight he lost was still competitive. I don't think his chin's all there. I know his striking, in my opinion, isn't balanced enough for him to stay away from Masvidal's combination punching or his jab. And then it becomes a question of who's the better grappler on the ground. I think Masvidal is better there too. So I expect him to win. I expect him to win a decision, but I wouldn't be shocked if once again he puts it on Jake early, and then Jake starts upping his volume and pushing a pace and pressing and trying to impose his will on him, and he slowly outworks Masvidal to a decision loss, or gives Masvidal a decision loss just because Masvidal didn't counter aggressively, didn't lead aggressively, or just fought defensively and started mugging and showing off for the crowd, which he has a bad habit of doing his entire career. This isn't something new. This is something he's done his entire career, and it's cost him rankings, opportunities for title fights. It's cost him a lot, and hopefully he's learned from it. But I can't say with any faith that he's not going to do it again, because he's just done it routinely.
Very good, good analysis looking at that fight there too. Gray Maynard, Ryan Hall. Is Gray Maynard done? Is this his last stand here?
Well, I thought Gray Maynard was done when he fought on the Ultimate Fighter card with Joanna. When he fought, I don't know the guy he fought. A good fight, because Ryan Hall is not a knockout type guy, and Gray Maynard's basically made a career out of taking people down, defending submissions, and slowly kind of chipping them up and chopping them up, if not just putting leather to them and putting them away. So in that instance, it's a good matchup, because Hall's not the kind of guy who's a dynamic striker. But on the other side of this, Brian Hall is probably, one of the very best grapplers, one of the most unique grappling games in MMA. So if Maynard takes him down, you have to ask yourself, can Maynard defend his submissions for the next 3 rounds? Can he do that for 3 rounds straight? I don't know. I mean, Ryan Hall he's a pretty exceptional grappler. And I still don't think, like, as I said routinely, I don't think Maynard's chin is still there. I don't have any faith in his chin at all. And I think if somebody can really put some heat on him, he's going to go out. I mean, even in his last fight, which was a win, the guy he beat is a guy that the real Gray Maynard walks through. But he went back and forth with that guy, and he was very close to losing that fight. So I would like to see Gray Maynard win, but until I know something more about his physical durability, I just can't ever bet on him. He just doesn't look like the same guy. He doesn't look as fast. He doesn't look as explosive. He's strong or dominating for a guy who's supposed to be a bully. I haven't really seen him bully anybody in years. So I'm probably going to go Ryan Hall on this one.
I'm going to go with you on that too. My only concern would be I wonder if Gray's good enough to basically lay and pray like Clay Guida used to do back in the day and not get himself heel hooked. But the way Ryan Hall is aggressive with his heel hooks, he switches transitions, and he double attacks. I can see Gray getting finished at some point in time in this bout here as well too. What else are you looking forward to this weekend? We got a pretty big slate of MMA action in front of us. So is there anything else that has caught your eye?
Not really. I'm always up for fights because I just like every fight you see, you can learn something from it. It gives me an idea for an article. It gives me certain examples that I can apply to other fights. Or sometimes I watch a fight and it makes me watch another fight, an older fight, years before, and I'll be like, oh man, I didn't even get that. It's all just a learning process for me. I enjoy seeing the fights, and I just enjoy expanding my knowledge. So anytime there's a fight on, even if it's a lower level fight, I can learn something from that, and that's going to help me provide better content for the fans and for the fans of the show and fans of the site or fans on Twitter. And that's what I'm all about, just getting knowledge so I can speak more intelligently and educate more people on combat sports in general.
Good. And what are you working on this week? Are you writing any new pieces coming up?
I got an idea for a piece. I really want to get on discuss some. I really want to discuss MMA corners. Anybody who's followed me on Twitter knows that I just have a disdain for a lot of MMA corners. I just don't think they're very good. I don't think they're very good. I don't think they know what they're doing, and I think they're jeopardizing these guys' paychecks and their careers by not giving them good instruction. Or if they're giving them good instruction, you haven't trained them well enough to be able to execute your plan in a stressful situation, which essentially defeats the purpose of you being their trainer or their corner man. If both of those things aren't happening, then there's no reason for you to get paid to come up there to train them or paid to take them to the UFC event and tell them nonsense in the corner. So I've already been working on that piece, and I've actually been working on a piece for Michael Venom Page as well. So we'll just see how it goes this weekend, and hopefully I'll have something for the fans next week, for the readers next week.
Good, man. Always stay productive. That's how I always do here.
Wait. Raphael, one last thing.
Go ahead, man.
I think last week a lot of people were saying that Brunson and that Whitaker fight were going to be pretty close because Brunson's a very good athlete. He's been dominating. He's been crushing people. And I think on our show, what we said was that the jab was going to make a difference. Whitaker had quick feet, and he was a comparable athlete. And if Brunson came too hard or got too aggressive, he was going to get put out. We also, instead of trying to strike with him in a wild striking match because he lunges and he throws himself into shots, he could get countered, and his defense sucks that he could get countered and made to pay for those lunging, wide open, powerful shots he likes to throw. He should attempt takedowns, get the clinch, and beat Whitaker up from that clinch. That's what we recommended. And when he did that, he had a lot of success. But when he went back to wild swinging and coming in aggressive and trying to overwhelm him with volume, Whitaker spun out, picked him apart, countered him, set up a beautiful head kick with a beautiful jab, and put him away. So just for people who think that we might not know what we're talking about, or we're just randomly picking things out and coming up with ideas and concepts that sound good but have no merit, that fight went pretty much like that was going to happen. That pretty much went from beginning to end how we said it. We said he's going to come out aggressive. We said he's going to swing wild. We said he would get countered. We said the footwork and the jab would be the difference. The footwork and the jab was the difference, and he got too aggressive and he got put out. So yet another example that we do know what we're talking about.
You know what we're talking about.
I got other examples, but I'm going to leave him with that for right now. I just wanted to bring that up.
We can't give it to him all at once. Let's just leave it there for right now. And with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and close out this show. We will be back next week to talk about Combat World, to talk about everything going on in MMA. But you can always catch us at MMA Ratings Net and at MMA Ratings Net on Instagram and Twitter, MMAratings.net on the web, where you can go rank your fights. Let us know what you think. And yeah, man, always come back because we're here to talk about all things mixed martial arts. Schwan, it's always great to have you on, and I will holler at you next week.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Have a great night, man.
You too.